As George Lucas lay in a hospital bed,
George actually became so stressed out that he ended up in the hospital.
with the weight of the world and the galaxy bearing down,
Rebel base in range.
and with the studio sharpening its axe,
They say to him, you better get this done or we're gonna pull the film.
with all these debilitating concerns, anyone else might well have quit. But for George Lucas and his audacious space opera, there was one thing he could pin his hopes on.
The Force?
Actually, something even more mysterious than that.
He said, oh, don't worry about it. We'll fix it later in post.
That's right. It's in the enigmatic world of post-production and editing, where George Lucas puts his faith.
You know, editing has always been Lucas's favorite part of the process. I mean, it's the thing he does really well.
For someone who did it even better was George's award-winning wife, Marcia Lucas.
Marsha was his partner. I mean, yes, it's George's world, it's George's vision, George's idea, he's the director, but she was an inspiration to him. She pushed him, she gave him new ideas. She was with him every step of the way.
And all of a sudden, we, these young mavericks, were making all these hit movies.
This is the story of just how far Marcia pushed George, further than anyone might know.
We didn't just make it work, we made something really, really, really special.
In fact, you might even say there was quite a bit of force involved.
This is our most desperate hour.
Star Wars: A New Hope was looking increasingly hopeless to a depleted George Lucas.
Fox was on his back all the time, and George was not happy about it.
And the man who was meant to have his back seemed to have gone to the back of the line.
How could I be so stupid? He's nowhere in sight.
George felt that Gary had let him down.
With a spiraling schedule, an overblown budget, and a borderline mutinous crew, it wasn't looking good for Gary.
Gary Kurtz line-produced Star Wars. George felt he didn't handle the British crew as well as George would have liked. George wanted Gary Kurtz to be the go-between between him and the crew.
The behemoth production that had promised so much looked like it could go the way of the Death Star.
I always had a feeling like we were always on the verge of just blowing up. The whole thing just collapsing, going nowhere.
But as George the artist lamented the potential collapse of his vision, George the businessman had to think about the bigger picture. Or in the words of his father,
Control your own fate.
and in this case, the bigger picture was more pictures.
He was hoping to do more Star Wars films if Star Wars was a hit. That was his hope for it.
But with hope dwindling behind the scenes, George would have to start hedging his bets.
George is starting to think, I don't know if I'm going to get a sequel out of this if Star Wars flops or underperforms. My sequel can only be made if it's really, really, really cheap.
So with Star Wars still in production, George put a backup plan into motion.
They contracted science fiction writer Alan Dean Foster to do an original novel that could be used as the basis for a sequel if a sequel was going to be made, and that was Splinter of the Mind's Eye. It was designed as this was going to be the quick sequel, the cheap sequel to Star Wars.
And just how cheap?
It all takes place basically on this one fog-enshrouded planet. And the whole idea there was one location, full of fog. You didn't have to spend a lot of money on sets.
Wouldn't have to spend much on those pricey visual effects either.
There was even apparently a space battle in it, and George asked Alan Dean Foster to cut it out.
But this was still only George's plan B. His plan A, the film he's desperately trying to finish, is still in need of dire help.
Someone needed to pull a rabbit out of a hat, and thankfully for George Lucas, he had a magician on his side, and he was married to her. But before Marsha waves her magic wand, we need to go to the start of the fairy tale. Because once upon a time, in the 1950s,
I was raised a latchkey kid with a single working mom. And I don't think she had any expectations for herself, and I don't think she had any great expectations for her children.
unlike her daughter, who saw a way out and a way up working in film.
And I worked my way up the ladder. I went from a film librarian to an apprentice film editor to an assistant film editor. I was making $55 a week. And then I found out that the editors were making about $400 a week. And I was blown away. If I could do it, I could be an editor and I would have financial security. But then the more I did, the more I loved it, and the more I wanted to do it, the more I didn't care if anybody paid me or not. I just was passionate about it.
A passion that would soon lead to romance with an up-and-coming USC student who was showing a great deal of potential.
And that's how I met George, because he was one of the film students. I thought he was really cute, but he was so quiet. Matter of fact, I told him he was cold fish, and he eventually told me that I was full of beans. So we opposites kind of attracted there.
The secret ingredient in this unlikely fish and beans recipe was to be a shared love of film.
I do love editing. I love making it work.
But when George Lucas couldn't make his first studio film, American Graffiti, work...
So the studio sees American Graffiti, and they hate it, and they're like, we're not going to release this film.
Marsha's love for editing more than made the cut, so to speak.
When I cut, it has to work. So I said to George, we're reading the script. It's not working in the structure of the movie. You need to combine some scenes so that a scene has a beginning, a middle, and an end. He said, no, I wrote it this way. I want to cut it this way.
But Marsha had a plan.
I said, let me restructure the movie. I can do it in one day. Sit down and look at it. And so he said, all right, already. And I did it, and we sat down and we ran the film.
I just saw a vision. I saw a goddess.
And the film worked. I think that's why Martin Scorsese asked me if I would edit his movie.
But this wasn't Martin Scorsese as we know him today. This was his first studio film.
Called Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore.
Alice doesn't live here anymore.
And as far as Marsha was concerned, household names like Francis Ford Coppola and Steven Spielberg were all just part of the gang.
And that was our friends. That was our social group. Well, we were just all mavericks in a way. Talent is talent, and talent just has a way of coming through.
With an Oscar nomination for American Graffiti and Martin Scorsese's film winning an Oscar,
Thank you.
Marcia Lucas was emerging as perhaps the most talented editor of them all.
She was known as the person you wanted to bring in. Her eye was considered terrific. Like, she could look at a movie and tell you how to make it better.
I just always innately kind of understood or felt when something worked.
Which brings us back to George. Because Star Wars as a movie wasn't working, and from the perspective of 20th Century Fox, the visual effect team needed to finish the film. Well, they weren't working either. But to be fair, it might just have been bad optics.
Well, there's plenty of bad optics. You got to remember, we were building a prototype, and the people who were there lived there. The studio always came during the day, but the majority of people worked at night. It was not what you'd consider a conventional working environment, and from their point of view, that was bad. And as a result, George was anxious.
When he came out of the hospital, he was like, this has to get under control.
Emerging from the hospital, George and the team made the final push to finish the movie. And with Marsha by his side, in a strictly unprofessional capacity,
I was not going to edit Star Wars. We're going to be on location, and George liked me to come out to the studio and drive him home every night.
It was becoming more and more obvious that when it came to George's problems, well, they'd have to fix them in post.
George was working with an English editor who was doing rough cuts of the scenes that were completely shot. The approach he was taking was that this was a slapstick comedy.
Aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper?
Huh? He wasn't treating it like it was real, like the characters were real, and the feelings were real, and the emotions were real, and it was always kind of using the broadest performance instead of the softest, most real performance. And I was not very happy.
And so, when principal photography wrapped in London on July the 16th, 1976, 20 days over schedule, the British editors stayed in Britain, and Marsha's time hanging around on set abruptly ended.
I started recutting from scratch.
We're in big trouble.
Not if I can help it.
With the daunting task of completely recutting her husband's movie.
This could really save my neck.
In every sense, Marsha had her work cut out, and so of course did George Lucas, who was carrying the burden of the gargantuan amount of special effects work that still needed to be done.
George was leaving every Monday and going down and working at ILM all week.
From George's point of view, at that point, challenge wasn't being meant. He was supposed to whip us into shape.
After months grappling with the groundbreaking technology required to make groundbreaking special effects, the ILM team was coming from behind.
And it really wasn't our fault. This is a unique thing. We're building a prototype.
Which meant literally reinventing the camera.
And he has to do so on only a $2 million budget.
Having come up with the name Industrial Light and Magic, John Dykstra also had a name for his new camera contraption.
Dystraflex.
Which was?
A computer-controlled camera system that can move past the model.
It had to be able to make repeatable moves. It had to move during exposure. It had to be done with miniatures that were small because the space we were able to afford was small, but it was all, in my mind, feasible.
But in the mind of the studio 20th Century Fox, not nearly feasible enough.
They were very hard on George in terms of budget and so forth.
Not just hard. The studio wanted to make a hard cut, one that threatened to take the very war out of Star Wars.
Stand by alert. Death Star approaching.
And they wanted to cut the end battle.
So, no trench run, no dogfight, and certainly no woohoo.
They go and they rescue the princess.
Good luck.
Instead, save the girl, save the day, and save Fox a lot of money.
That's it. The movie's over.
Can you imagine if Star Wars ended with the rescue of the princess and there's no attack on the Death Star? It's very unlikely then that audiences would have left the theater, got right back in line to see it again, or told their friends that they have to see this film.
Luckily, for filmgoers everywhere.
George was determined to have this end battle in the film.
So, in this crucial battle over the battle, George planned a bold move to save his story.
He wanted to get it in the pipeline early so that they couldn't eliminate it.
Very clever, you might say. But that put Marsha, who was frantically untangling the edit, on the front line.
Man your ships, and may the Force be with you.
George came to me and said, by the way, ILM needs the final cut of the trench run. So would you please edit the end battle for me? I said, if we're going to make this deadline, I'm swamped in the end battle, we need another editor. Can we bring in another editor, please?
Oh, how about Paul Hirsch? He's another editor.
So Paul came in. There's also a local editor, Richard Shue, had come in.
At that point, Marsha was assembling the end battle.
I have you now.
It was a monumental task, so I was brought in to help with what Richard was doing, which was to recut the original editor's cut. And Richard was cutting from dailies on Reel 1, so he started at the beginning. I said, I'd like to see the cut. He said, we don't have time, just grab the next reel and get going. Marsha thinks you should start on this scene, which is the robot auction.
It's R2 unit has a bad motivator, look!
Hey, what are you trying to push on us?
Sitting down with none other than George Lucas, they watched the disastrous cut of the scene.
And I was a little uneasy. I said, I don't know, George, it looks pretty good to me. And he said, I thought so too, but Marsha thinks it can be better. I got into it and I started working on it, and sure enough, she was right.
What about that one?
What about that blue one? We'll take that one.
But not every scene, well, sucked.
The bit where R2-D2 gets sucked up, they dropped it down and reversed the film. I just loved that.
However, moving forward, Marsha faced an entire top-to-bottom recut, which was daunting enough, but it was the powerful pull of the immovable deadline that really had them scrambling.
We have no time for SARS, Commander.
So the movie is scheduled for Memorial Day weekend, and that date is set in stone, so the film has to be finished before then.
Well, with less than 6 months to go, back at ILM, the pressure was intense. Unable to work on the final scene until Marsha had finished the cut, there was a vast multitude of other special effects that needed to be done too.
Now be careful, R2.
It was time for ILM to make its move, which is exactly what stop-motion animator Phil Tippett did for this iconic scene.
You made a fair move. Screaming about it can't help you.
I had brought in a stop-motion puppet that I made when I was younger, and George saw that, and that gave him the idea to do the chess sequence as stop motion. Previously, what he was going to do is just use people in masks, shot against black, and then composite them into the chessboard. But when we went in and over 3 days, lit it and shot it, it exceeded all of our expectations, you know. It was totally the right move.
Let the Wookiee win.
You know, I was working for a filmmaker we all respected. He was making a science fiction movie with monsters in it, and that's what we had always wanted to do since we were 5 years old. And now we were, you know, living the dream.
A dream that was far from over for Phil Tippett, because as Paul and Richard were hard at work recutting the movie, George began to have, shall we say, monstrous ideas.
George wanted to embellish the cantina scene.
Hey, we don't serve their kind here.
What?
The droids, they left the wait outside.
This footage from Elstree Studios was all George had seen of the famous cantina scene.
George just didn't feel it had enough oomph at that point.
Didn't look like the weird aliens that they wanted.
Out of time and out of money, George would need to use his head, or somebody else's.
The special effects aren't working. The film is over budget. It's behind schedule. He's being told to cut the third act of the film. He still goes before the same people that are threatening to pull the funding and says, I need more money to finish the film.
George needed aliens fast, and he knew just the humans for the job.
My name's Rick Baker, and I call myself a makeup artist. I do special makeup effects.
Rick and legendary creature creator Phil Tippett were primed for a challenge.
Make as many aliens as we could in 6 weeks.
Star Wars was finished. They shot the film in England, so they called me in. We found a little workshop we could work in, and we started making these aliens. We had very little money. I said, you know, George, we can't make that much stuff in the time frame that we have, but I have a lot of masks that I'll just let you use. One of them was this devil guy, a werewolf guy, this bat demon thing.
It was starting to look like a Halloween party, and of course, every good party needs the right band.
George said, you know, I think we should have a band, and we decided this guy would be a good member for the band, so we then duplicated.
A cheap way to get a band full of aliens, and that sounded good to Gary Kurtz, who was now quite concerned with any kind of overage.
Because he was the money guy, basically, or the lack of money guy.
And why stop there? Who needs to pay for actors anyway?
So a lot of Rick's crew wound up pulled in to wear the different masks. And so Phil is wearing the mask in the scene. They didn't realize that people in this had to see and breathe.
And so Gary Kurtz, used to slashing budgets,
Gary Kurtz came in with a razor blade and started poking holes in the mask while they're wearing them. You know, and his story is that he's watching that razor go by as he's cutting the holes. You look at that scene and you'd never know that they shot this on 2 different continents, months apart, different sets, different crew. The first guy you see, the sort of anvil kind of headed guy that has the glowing eyes, in the film, when he turns, there's like a little mechanical thing on the side of his head. And for years, we didn't know what it was. Well, we dug through the Lucasfilm archives, and it turns out, in order to get the eyes to glow, they jammed a 70s flashlight into the back of his head.
Don't blast him! Don't blast him!
One guy gets his arm cut off, and we ended up using one of the hands that I'd made, again, way before Star Wars, for my devil character, and that falls on the ground there in that shot. It was more about just giving you more cool things to look at in that scene.
Given that it's one of the most iconic scenes in Star Wars: A New Hope, the guy who dusted off the masks has a little secret.
Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I don't like George's choices of the aliens, you know. I think he's got great taste with the spaceships and all that stuff, not so much with aliens, you know. I think we made some that were cooler that don't even show up, and then he used my werewolf mask, you know. I was like, why don't you use this one that we specifically made? I think it's cooler, you know. But, you know, everybody has different opinions on what's good and what's bad.
Good or bad, these random Halloween masks, many of which were sitting around Rick Baker's studio, have grown iconic enough over the decades to make the leap from lurid latex to plastic playthings countless times over.
Which they weren't supposed to do. I was supposed to maintain the copyrights in those characters, but what am I going to do? You know, George has more money than me.
And safe to say, more toys. But playtime was definitely over.
Star Wars coming to your galaxy this summer.
Racing towards an immovable release date, Marcia Lucas was editing as fast as her little moviola could handle.
We were always under a lot of pressure to get the product out.
Enemy fighters coming your way.
Putting together the end battle, which needed to be locked so ILM could get to work on the effects. She was starting from scratch, almost, because Marsha was cobbling together a sequence from another battle, from another time, in another film. Using footage from the classic World War II film and George Lucas' favorite, The Dam Busters, as a visual reference.
How many guns do you think, Gold 5?
I would say there's about 10 guns. Some on the surface, some on the towers.
With the black and white footage, I was creating the battle and making it believable.
Marsha could work out what ILM needed to shoot to finish the final battle.
It's away!
While Marsha had her hands full crafting dogfights and just generally wiping away remnants of the film's original edit.
In television commercials, we used to do a lot of wipes. So I suggested to George that I thought it'd be a great idea to use wipes for scene transitions.
Paul Hirsch was having an altogether different experience as he pulled out the reels and looked at recutting another section of the film.
At the beginning of the film, while the battle in space is going on, Vader has captured the rebel ship. Vader's had his confrontation with Princess Leia.
You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take it away!
And in the middle of all this going on, we cut to Luke on the surface of Tatooine. And then Luke speeds up to this place.
Come on, shape it up, you guys! Big!
You know, I'm trying to make cuts and I'm suffering through this thing and I'm thinking, why do we even need this scene? What is this scene?
It was a terrible scene.
And I said to George, I said, what is this place? He says, it's a teen hangout.
You should have been there. It was fantastic.
So what if we just took it out? Why do we need the scene? He said, well, yeah, let's try it.
We cut that scene out, and it never went back in.
Once we took it out, our first clue that Tatooine is inhabited is at the robot auction. And that's how we get to Luke, and it's a much more organic introduction of the character.
But Paul was only just getting started with the good ideas.
We all share cuts. I said, come see this cut. I look at your cut, we all look at each other's cuts.
Because Marsha, still in the depths of the trenches, was struggling to make it work.
It was a monumental task, and that would absorb her full attention.
With the urgent task of doing the end battle.
So I had cut, of course, as a scripted. In the original end battle, Luke makes the trench run twice.
Watch yourself, increase speed full throttle.
He goes in once, uses the computer, and he misses the shot, and then he goes back again. And we all sat there and said, you know, this is too much. Luke needs to make one run.
Much better, but something still wasn't right.
R2 trying to increase the power.
And then Paul said, we need a time clock.
Commence primary ignition.
And then I think I said, well, the Death Star should be moving to shoot up the Rebel base.
The Rebel base will be in firing range in 7 minutes.
I said, we've got the footage. We've got the footage on the Death Star warming up when they shoot Princess Leia's planet of Alderaan.
What?
Using footage originally shot for entirely different scenes, Marsha conjured drama out of thin air.
There was a lot of voiceover stuff. There's a lot of countdown.
1 minute and closing.
But if you actually look in the film, nobody's doing the counting down.
30 seconds and closing.
And it added attention to the scene that was great. It needed it.
I'm on the leader.
There was one particular moment that she was very insistent on. She kept saying, if this moment doesn't work, then the whole picture doesn't work. And there was a moment when Han, at the last minute, rescues Luke.
I have you now. What?
If that moment doesn't work, it's all over.
You're all clear, kid. Now let's blow this thing and go home.
Marsha had in effect saved the universe.
Great shot, kid. That was 1 in a million.
And hopefully, the ending of Star Wars. The question now was, could George Lucas and John Dykstra get the effects done in time without destroying each other? With the edit for the end battle finally together, the pressure was increasingly falling upon ILM to come through on their end of the bargain. But George was losing faith.
Because we hadn't provided enough product for him to see, that translated into stress for George.
Which in turn translated into tension between director and visual effects supervisor.
George and my managerial style weren't compatible. He wanted to be able to crack the whip when he needed to crack it, and he didn't have the whip because I ran that shop. People answered to me. And I was frustrating to him because he didn't understand how the machine worked.
But at this point, George Lucas couldn't be sure
This had better work.
if the film even worked.
That isn't very reassuring.
To find out, in February of 1977, mere months before the release of Star Wars in late May, Lucas was ready to audition his still unfinished opus in front of trusted friends who just happened to be the luminaries of American cinema.
We had a screening room in the back of our house, and we watched it in the house to see how things were playing out and how they were working.
Hollywood's most esteemed directors were ready to pass judgment. Spielberg was there.
Spielberg loved it, and he thought it was going to go great.
As was Brian De Palma.
I remember Brian De Palma coming out and saying in his loud, bulky voice, "George, you got to get rid of that Force thing. That doesn't work at all. What is that?"
The Force is what gives the Jedi his power.
De Palma's skepticism seems straight from the dark side.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Brian De Palma told them it was an embarrassment, that it would be a career killer for him.
"George, you got to get rid of that Force. What were you thinking?" You know, kind of thing.
Don't underestimate the Force.
And I went home and I said, "George, he does not know what he's talking about. You can't get rid of the Force."
The Force will be with you. Always.
So that settled then. With Marsha's work basically done,
We had locked the work print, and special effects were starting to come in.
she went about finding her next gig.
You expect me to leave after the way you talked to me just now?
Marty called me and asked me if I'd come down and help him out on this film.
New York, New York.
However, while Marsha was cutting up the Big Apple, the nagging voice of Brian De Palma
"You gotta get rid of that Force."
ate away at George, and he took a lightsaber to the cut.
George started removing many of the "May the Force be with you."
Then the next time I saw another screening, they cut the Force out in a couple places.
Hey, Luke.
And he removed one of the most critical ones.
May the Force be with you.
The Han Solo character saying that to the kid meant, you know, there was more to him than met the eye.
This was the moment Marsha became arguably the first person in the universe to use the Force.
And she puts it back in. "May the Force be with you."
And before you question Brian De Palma
was really giving him a hard time about it.
And Steven Spielberg's judgment,
I love the movie. I was probably one of the only people in the audience that liked the movie.
oh, all right, Mr. Spielberg. In any case, this was an early cut with very little in the way of completed effects.
Would it help if you told him it was my fault? Sure.
So these guys are like watching this film and there's no real sci-fi special effects. And there's like interwoven World War II black and white footage. It's a bit of a mess.
The screening had backfired. And now, with that cheap and foggy Plan B sequel looking increasingly inevitable, George Lucas faced a final push to the finish line, not entirely certain that the movie he was making made any sense at all. But he would finish the movie nonetheless.
We're in position. I'm going to cut across the axis and try and draw their fire.
I think we were just about to get into the trench scene where the ships are flying in and chasing each other and shooting. And we were standing near some of the model work, and the trench was there, all made out of urethane and stuff.
And there in front of the urethane trenches, the mild-mannered cold fish, as some called him, came alive.
And he described that scene to us. It got us all fired up, like, wow, can't wait to do this.
A signature thing about Star Wars, from my point of view, is the whole idea of flying down the trench. The sizzle was how we were going to do this climactic battle sequence.
The key to the illusion lay in a trick of human perception John had picked up from his life in the fast lane.
Which is that the closer you get to things, the faster it feels that you're traveling.
That gave John an idea.
Well, let's fly the X-Wings through a canyon to get that sense of speed.
And this is where the Dijkstra Flex really Dijkstra flexed its muscles.
The trench was about 2 feet wide, about 2 feet deep, and probably 60 feet long.
Literally in the trenches, the ILM team could now shoot the scenes needed to replace the black and white World War II footage.
We took the camera, which was mounted on an arm.
The camera could, come down into the trench.
The camera was very small, which allowed it to go into our miniature trench.
But in order to convincingly make the descent into the trench from up high, the shot would have to be pulled off with a clever combination of matte painting and models.
You're far away from the surface, and that's where you use the painting.
Which lasts up until this conveniently placed laser flash.
And it transitions to a medium-sized model, and then transitions to the full-size trench model. Then we just tried different speeds to see what worked.
Speedily inserting completed ILM shots, the finish line was near.
Once we got to a certain point, there was no question of making further picture changes, except at great cost.
And so, with a movie over schedule and over budget,
George came in one day and he said, "We have to show that Vader got away."
Look out!
The last picture change we made was a suggestion of George's. He came in one day and he said, "We have to show that Vader got away." And we constructed a little sequence.
They find a piece of footage that was filmed on a rocker of Vader in his capsule spinning around. So they use that and then they steady it and they have a shot of Vader's ship flying away. Suddenly Vader's still alive.
With Vader escaping to presumably continue his reign of terror in Splinter of the Mind's Eye, it's worth remembering at this point that not one person among them had any idea what they were creating.
It isn't like that's what we were setting out to do. Your expectations only extend as far as you can see.
And with the deadline looming, some were exhausted, and some just were looming.
Gary Kurtz. He had a strangely looming quality.
Just kind of this stern, solid brick of a guy that
lurked about.
I do have one memory. I was talking about Gary, I'm sure something not so nice, and I walked out there and he was just standing there. It's like, oops.
But for Gary and George, there was more to oversee than just X-Wing fighters and Millennium Falcons. Because there's much more to the visual effects in Star Wars than just the visuals. You'd have to wonder if Star Wars would be Star Wars if a lightsaber sounded like this. Or a droid sounded like this.
Don't get technical with me.
Would Star Wars be Star Wars if the epic score was less this? And more this? And when it comes to the sound of Star Wars, there's two people we need to hear about. And the first one...
Now, Ben Burtt is probably the most brilliant sound man on the planet Earth.
And nowhere was that brilliance more evident than when heard through iconic, memorable sound effects, such as this one. Well, granted, by the time you heard it, it sounded like this. But there was even more to this soundscape savant than just lasers.
R2-D2 wouldn't be R2-D2 without Ben Burtt.
Did you hear that?
Ben's musicality of R2-D2 sounds, the utterly understandable phrases that Ben Burtt had created.
Well, I don't think he likes you at all. No, I don't like you either.
Replying, asking questions, being rude, being...
Wake up!
It was magic.
And a fair amount of good, old-fashioned creativity.
I mean, the random things that he made sounds from, it's amazing.
One of my favorites is the lightsaber sound, the hum.
I mean, he made a lightsaber sound by waving a microphone in front of a speaker that was playing back a hum. And then there's the TIE fighters. It's elephants layered with the sounds of cars driving on wet pavements. But the animal sounds don't end there. Chewbacca. First, he recorded a bear, and then he sprinkled in other random animal sounds like walruses.
Are you said it, Chewie?
For his music, too, George Lucas wanted to recombine the familiar.
Lucas's original idea was to score the film using arrangements from Holt's The Planets.
The classical repertoire had proven fertile ground for one of George Lucas's favorite films. But an introduction opened another door.
Steven Spielberg introduced Lucas to John Williams. They'd worked together on Sugarland Express and then famously Jaws,
in which the composer proved that the right orchestral score could elevate dramatic scenes in unforgettable ways.
And when Lucas told John Williams his ideas, John Williams said, you need music that's written for this film so that will match the film. And he said, I will do a score.
Unlike what Star Wars was doing visually, what Lucas wanted for his score was anything but groundbreaking.
Lucas wanted a traditional Hollywood swashbuckler kind of score.
He wanted Star Wars to have the feeling of the old-fashioned serials.
And you know, without John Williams' music, and I've seen that first one without music, hey, you better be grateful John was around.
The score was so fantastic. What that music did to lift it from being a very great film to being a very, very great film.
With the edit, effects, sound design, and now a score complete, George Lucas must have felt pretty good about himself.
Lucas is very unhappy with what he's seen. He feels like Dicer let him down on all fronts.
I'm done for.
And to prove himself right, George Lucas arranged another screening 30 days before Star Wars would premiere nationally.
And they very carefully recruited a bunch of 17 to 25-year-olds.
And they started off with a Chuck Jones Duck Dodgers cartoon. The crawl goes up and it starts.
Finally, Star Wars came to life, and this iconic text...
The crawl wasn't right.
It made no sense whatsoever. It was a terribly confusing start.
George had written it, it was too vague and unhelpful.
But don't worry, it didn't take too long to turn things around.
Oh my, I'd forgotten how much I hate space travel.
When they escaped from Mos Eisley and went into hyperspace, the whole audience stood up cheering. It was like the ninth inning of a seventh game of a World Series and somebody hit a home run. We cut to Han going, wahoo! Yahoo! Again, same thing, the whole audience erupted cheering. And
When I saw the special effects, I was blown away from my black and white footage.
It was really exciting to go in and see your work, which we've been looking at on a fairly large screen, but not as big as that.
Look at the size of that thing.
It all came together, and it just made this beautiful film, this amazing film.
The Force will be with you, always.
They gave it a standing ovation at the end.
And as for that studio head who'd taken a big gamble on this young filmmaker.
Alan Ladd Jr. walked out of the film knowing he had a hit movie on his hands.
And as for this team...
I looked over at Marsha and she went... And, you know, we sort of exchanged looks, you know. Guess it worked. It worked.
And in a delightful moment of redemption for Brian De Palma, he came back to help his good friend George by rewriting the opening crawl.
De Palma
helped concocted the text that we have today.
With the fate of Star Wars now in the hands of moviegoers following its May 1977 release, George Lucas vanished. On May the 25th, 1977, Star Wars opened on movie screens across the country. The past 4 years of hard work finally coming to fruition, George Lucas did what any writer, director, producer in his position would do. He went on vacation.
When the movies opened, we had a tradition of going over to Hawaii. If you read the critics and they hate your movie, you feel bad. So we left. And then people came over and said, you won't believe what's going on with your movie.
What was going on was a lot of, well, waiting.
People are lined up around the block, all over the country.
Star Wars was a hit.
We did it!
A hit on its way to becoming a phenomenon.
It then continued to go wide through the summer.
Cinema goers couldn't get enough.
People were seeing it in the theater 3 to 4 times, and that's crazy repeat business.
And then I thought, wow, we didn't just make it work, we made something really, really, really special.
Not only was it special, but it was also just what America needed.
Vietnam had just ended a few years earlier, and the country was kind of in a malaise about that. And this optimistic, old-style Hollywood picture comes along. It was a thrill every few minutes, and I think people just were so thirsty for something uplifting.
The first time I saw the original Star Wars, when that ship came overhead, I ducked.
This ambitious, costly space opera
New Hope's budget ends up being about $11 million.
proved that Lucas was lucrative.
Star Wars grossed $700 million. If you adjust for inflation, that's $1.6 billion at the box office.
Nobody on that set thought it was any good. Straight to video. Now you would say that. Straight to video. We were all wrong.
Star Wars nearly swept the Oscars,
Star Wars.
winning for art decoration, set decoration, costume, score, sound mixing, sound effects, and visual effects.
I didn't really have an expectation of winning, so I got good and drunk.
Joan Fontaine gave me an Oscar. I mean, it was like, is this reality?
It also won an Oscar for Best Editing.
The winners are Paul Hirsch, Marcia Lucas, and Richard Chew for Star Wars.
I couldn't believe it. I didn't expect it.
The Oscar came so early in my career, I hadn't even developed a desire for one yet.
Thank you.
It was unreal.
And together we will announce the nominees for the Best Director.
But as for Marsha's husband,
Woody Allen for Annie Hall.
George didn't win director. Well, that made me sad. If ever there was somebody who deserved a directing award, it was George Lucas for Star Wars.
Annie Hall.
Woody Allen's comedy also beat Star Wars for Best Picture. But George had done something no single award could recognize.
George changed the way motion pictures were made with Star Wars. You look at an old film, no matter how good it is, the dialogue went on and on. Today, it's fast.
All George would say was, do it again faster.
Do it again faster.
Faster and more intense.
Cutting is faster. Music is better. Sound effects are terrific. George owned and created ILM, which was and is the best visual effects house in the world.
With Star Wars: A New Hope, George Lucas had truly disrupted the industry, creatively and technologically.
I never expected when I was working on a film that it would be pored over by students and scholars for the next several decades.
And now, nearly half a century later, we can celebrate the fantastic talents of those who helped realize this masterpiece.
In my heart, I'm so proud of my involvement, and I think that when I do get recognition, it feels good.
But the recognition George Lucas wanted most wasn't an Oscar.
His father did not respect the entertainment industry. It's not the same as success in a respectable field.
Own your own business. Don't work for other people.
I don't think his dad had much expectations for George.
And so for the family of this small-town hero,
They were shocked, really shocked by his success. Never saw it coming.
And I think that would hurt.
the painful process of making Star Wars had taken its toll on George and those in his orbit. But George was far from done. And for the team behind this now iconic movie, everything was about to change. But for some, not exactly how they expected.
Well, after the movie was a success, George went, oh God, now I have to make a sequel.
The idea was to make a sequel cheap. There was a space battle, and George said, cut it out.